Sorry, I don't speak monkey.
She was 7 years old. She wasn't bothering anyone. She wasn't making noise. She wasn't running up and down the aisle. She wasn't asking for anything that hadn't already been offered to every other passenger in that cabin. She was sitting in her seat, a first-class seat, mind you, with her little legs dangling above the floor because she wasn't quite tall enough for her feet to reach it, and she was coloring. Just coloring. Her tongue pressed lightly to the corner of her lip the way children do when they're concentrating, her small brown fingers moving carefully inside the lines of whatever she was drawing in that notebook she carried everywhere with her. That was all she was doing. And a flight attendant, a grown woman, a professional, a person whose entire job is to make passengers feel comfortable and safe and welcome, walked past this little girl, glanced down at her, and made a noise. Not a word. Not a complaint. Not even a full sentence. A noise. The kind of noise that has only one meaning. Low, deliberate, unmistakable. And then she turned to her colleague and laughed about it like it was the funniest thing in the world. Like this child was a punchline. Like she wasn't even a person worth considering. The cabin went quiet. Not the polite, soft quiet of people minding their own business at altitude. A different kind of quiet. The kind that falls when something deeply wrong has just happened in a shared space and everyone present knows it, feels it, but nobody is sure who is going to be the first to say something. And then, in the window seat right beside that little girl, a woman slowly lowered the magazine she had been reading. She didn't slam it down.
She didn't gasp.
She didn't jump to her feet. She simply lowered it, quietly, with the kind of deliberate control that takes years to develop. And she turned her head toward that flight attendant with a calm so complete, so perfectly composed, so absolutely still, that it was more frightening than any raised voice could have ever been. That was the little girl's mother. And what that flight attendant did not know, what not a single person on that aircraft knew, including the pilots, including the cabin manager, including the airline's own ground staff who had checked them in that morning, was exactly who she had just chosen to humiliate. Because this woman had not introduced herself when she boarded. She never introduced herself anywhere she went.
She didn't need to.
She had learned a long time ago that the kind of power she carried didn't need a name tag. She had boarded quietly, settled her daughter in, helped her with her seatbelt, kissed the top of her head, and opened her magazine. Just a mother. Just a woman on a plane. But by the time that aircraft landed, nothing would be the same. Not for the flight attendant. Not for the airline. Not for the cabin manager who was about to make a very costly mistake of his own. And not for every person in that cabin who witnessed what was about to unfold at 35,000 feet. Stay with me, because this story is going to take you somewhere, and I promise you, every single minute of it is worth it. And if this is your first time here, if a friend sent you this video, or it found its way to you somehow, hit that subscribe button right now because we tell stories like this every single week and you will not want to miss a single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Because to truly understand what happened on that plane, you first need to understand who that little girl is. You need to see her properly. You need to know her. And once you do, what that flight attendant did is going to land so much harder. Her name is Amara Osei. She is 7 years old, and she is the kind of child that makes strangers stop and smile without knowing exactly why. Maybe it's the way she looks at things, with a kind of focused, wide-eyed attention that most adults have long since lost. She doesn't scroll through anything or rush past anything. She stops and looks. At clouds, at insects, at the patterns water makes when it moves. She once stood at a puddle in a parking lot for 4 full minutes watching a beetle navigate its way across the surface, and when her mother finally called her name, she looked up and said, completely seriously, "Mummy, he made it." Like it was news worth reporting. Like the beetle's journey mattered, because to Amara, it did. She is small for her age, with deep brown skin and big, watchful eyes framed by thick lashes that curl naturally upward like they're always reaching for something. She wears her hair in 2 puffs on either side of her head. Her mother does them every morning before school, and Amara chooses the color of the hair ties herself. On the morning of this particular story, she had chosen yellow. Her favorite color, she will tell you, is the yellow of sunflowers, which is different. She is very careful to explain from regular yellow, which she finds too bright and not serious enough. She carries a notebook everywhere she goes. Not a coloring book, a proper lined notebook with a dark blue cover that she has covered in star stickers she collected over the course of an entire year. Inside that notebook, she draws constellations. Not copied from books, though she has read plenty of them. Her own. She invents constellations and names them and writes little descriptions of each one the way she imagines a scientist might. She has a constellation called the Snail, which she discovered one evening while lying on the back lawn with her mother, and another called the Forgotten Shoe, which she refuses to explain the origin of. There are 23 constellations in the notebook so far. She is working on number 24. She is obsessed with two things: butterflies and astronomy. Not as separate interests, but as a unified worldview. She believes, with complete sincerity, that butterflies navigate by the stars, and she has explained this theory to her mother, her teacher, 3 separate librarians, and the man who delivers their groceries. None of them had the heart to fully correct her, though her mother has quietly ordered 2 books on the subject of lepidopterology that are waiting on Amara's bookshelf at home. At school, she is the child who asks the teacher follow-up questions. Not because she is trying to be difficult. She is one of the most cooperative children in her class, but because her brain is always a half step ahead, turning the answer over, looking at it from another angle, wondering what it connects to. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called Nadia in for a meeting in October not because Amara was in trouble, but because Mrs. Patterson wanted to talk about the reading program. She's already past the level we offer, Mrs. Patterson said, choosing her words carefully. I want to talk about how we support her. Nadia listened and nodded and thanked her, and on the drive home thought, not for the first time, about what kind of world this daughter of hers was going to grow up into. Because Nadia thinks about that a lot. She thinks about it the way all Black mothers think about it, with love and with dread running alongside each other like 2 rivers that never fully separate. She thinks about the conversations she will have to have with Amara, the ones she has already started, gently in small doses, because Amara is perceptive enough that silence would feel like a lie. She thinks about the day Amara will walk into a room and be underestimated before she opens her mouth, and she thinks about how she is trying to give her daughter the tools to handle that without letting it hollow her out. She thinks about Amara's grandmother, Adwoa, who passed 18 months ago at the age of 79, and who is the reason this trip to London existed at all. Nadia Osei was born in Accra to a Ghanaian father and a British Ghanaian mother, and she spent the first 15 years of her life moving between both countries before her family settled in London in the early 1960s. She was a schoolteacher for 35 years. She taught English literature, and she believed, with every fiber of herself, that stories were the most important thing in the world, that stories were how people understood who they were and who they could become. She used to say, "If you can name what you feel, you can survive it." She said it so often that it became the sentence Nadia reaches for most, even now, even when her mother is no longer here to say it. When Nadia immigrated to the United States at 19, Adwoa pressed 4 things into her hands at the airport: a worn Bible, a photograph of the family home in Accra, a sponsorship letter from a distant cousin in Atlanta, and $400 American in cash. "That's everything I have to give you," Adwoa said. "The rest you make yourself." And Nadia, who was 19 and frightened and trying very hard not to show it, said, "I know, Mama." And then she walked through the gate and didn't look back because she knew if she looked back she would not be able to go. She had promised her mother she would bring Amara to London one day, to show her where her grandmother had lived, to walk the streets Adwoa had walked, to stand in front of the school where she had taught and feel the weight of that history and carry it forward. The trip had been planned for the spring before Adwoa died, and then she got sick, and then it was too late. So now the trip is different. It is still a promise kept, but it is also a grief carried gently, the way you carry something that belongs to someone else. Amara knows this. She understands it the way 7-year-olds understand things they have not yet found the full vocabulary for. She knows this trip is about Grandma Adwoa. She knows it matters. The night before they left, she sat at the kitchen table and drew a picture of what she imagined London looked like: the Thames, Big Ben, a double-decker bus, and above it all, a sky full of stars, and she labeled it for Grandma in her careful, deliberate handwriting and left it on the kitchen counter where Nadia would find it in the morning. Nadia found it. She stood in the kitchen in the dark for a long moment before she picked it up and pressed it carefully between the pages of her carry-on bag. This is who Amara Osei is. This is the child who is sitting in that first-class seat, coloring quietly, her feet not quite reaching the floor. And now let me tell you who her mother is. Because Nadia Osei is a story of her own. Nadia Osei is 38 years old. She is tall, with the kind of posture that comes not from training but from a lifelong habit of refusing to make herself small. She wears her natural hair out, a full, low-cut coil that she keeps immaculate, and she favors simple, high-quality clothing in neutral tones. Minimal jewelry. A watch that was her mother's. She does not dress to announce herself. She dresses to move through the world efficiently and without friction, because she learned early on that every second spent managing other people's first impressions was a second stolen from her. She is worth $2.3 billion. That number still feels strange even to type, because it is not how Nadia thinks about herself. She does not think of herself as a billionaire the way that word tends to conjure images: the yacht, the private island, the entourage. She thinks of herself as a woman who solved a problem that nobody else was paying attention to, and who was stubborn enough and precise enough and unglamorous enough in her methods to build something real out of it. The problem was logistics. Specifically, the gap in last-mile delivery infrastructure that existed across several mid-sized African cities and in the underserved urban corridors of the American South. When Nadia arrived in Atlanta at 19 with her $400 and her cousin's sponsorship letter, she got a job at a distribution warehouse on the outskirts of the city. She worked nights so she could take classes during the day. She studied supply chain management, and she watched the warehouse, and she saw, very quickly, how much money was being lost to inefficiency, to routes that made no sense, to systems that hadn't been updated in a decade, to a fundamental unwillingness by the people in charge to listen to the people on the floor, who actually understood the problems. She started writing things down. Observations. Suggestions. She gave them to her supervisor, who ignored them. She gave them to her supervisor's supervisor, who lost them. She kept writing them down anyway because she understood that the clarity was for herself, not for them. She was building a mental model of a system she intended to one day replace. She had learned, very early in her life, that the most dangerous thing you can do is build your understanding of a problem around the assumption that someone else is going to fix it. You watch. You document. You understand it better than the people who built it. And then, when you are ready, you move. It took her 12 years. 12 years of working, saving, learning, failing at 2 smaller ventures, losing money she couldn't afford to lose, and starting again. She does not omit the failures from the story when she tells it, because she believes the failures are the most important part, not as proof of perseverance, which is how people tend to want to frame them, but as proof of information. Every failure taught her something specific. The first venture failed because she scaled too fast. The second failed because she trusted a partner whose judgment turned out to be poor in ways she had noticed, but decided to overlook. She did not overlook those things again. She became, through the process of failing correctly, one of the most precise operational minds in her industry. And then, at 31, she launched Osei Logistics from a single warehouse in East Atlanta with 11 employees and one significant client who took a chance on her based on nothing more than a 40-page proposal and a conversation that lasted 2.5 hours. That client later said, in an interview, that he had never in his career been in a room with someone who understood supply chain the way Nadia did, and that he had decided to sign with her inside the first 20 minutes, but let her finish talking because she was that interesting to listen to. Within 4 years, Osei Logistics had expanded to 6 cities. Within 7, they were operating across 3 continents. The growth was not accidental. Nadia was methodical in the way that only someone who has had nothing and built everything can be. She trusted data over instinct, hired people who were smarter than her in specific areas and listened to them, and refused to scale faster than her systems could support. She made mistakes. She talks about them freely. In the interviews she occasionally gives, with a frankness that surprises people who expect her to perform success without acknowledging its cost. She started writing things down. Observations. Suggestions. She gave them to her supervisor, who ignored them. She gave them to her supervisor's supervisor, who lost them. She kept writing them down anyway because she understood that the clarity was for herself, not for them. She was building a mental model of a system she intended to one day replace. It took her 12 years. 12 years of working, saving, learning, failing at 2 smaller ventures, losing money she couldn't afford to lose, and starting again. And then, at 31, she launched Osei Logistics from a single warehouse in East Atlanta with 11 employees and one significant client who took a chance on her based on nothing more than a 40-page proposal and a conversation that lasted 2.5 hours. That client later said in an interview that he had never in his career been in a room with someone who understood supply chain the way Nadia did, and that he had decided to sign with her inside the first 20 minutes, but let her finish talking because she was that interesting to listen to. Within 4 years, Osei Logistics had expanded to 6 cities. Within 7, they were operating across 3 continents. The growth was not accidental. Nadia was methodical in the way that only someone who has had nothing and built everything can be. She trusted data over instinct, hired people who were smarter than her in specific areas and listened to them, and refused to scale faster than her systems could support. She made mistakes. She talks about them freely, in the interviews she occasionally gives, with a frankness that surprises people who expect her to perform success without acknowledging its cost. She has been asked, many times, what the hardest part was. She always gives the same answer: the rooms. The rooms where she walked in and watched the temperature change. Where the handshakes were too brief or not offered at all. Where questions were directed to whoever she had brought with her instead of to her. Where assumptions were made about what she knew and what she didn't know, and what she was doing there. She learned to handle those rooms with a stillness that sometimes unnerved people. Not a deflated stillness, but a chosen one, a strategic one, a stillness that conserved energy for the moments that actually mattered. She has a memory she returns to sometimes, when she needs to remind herself of where she came from and what it cost. It is from her 3rd year in Atlanta. She was 22, and she had been working at the warehouse for 3 years, and she had just been passed over for a shift supervisor role that she was, by every measurable metric, more qualified for than the man who received it. She did not make a scene. She went home, sat at the kitchen table of the apartment she shared with her cousin and her cousin's wife and their 2 children, and she wrote in her notebook for 2 hours. Not about the injustice. About the system. About how the system worked, why it produced the outcome it produced, what would need to change in order for the outcome to be different, and what she was going to do about it given that she could not immediately change the system, but she could change her position within it. She gave herself 5 years to be in a position where she no longer needed to ask those rooms for anything. It took 4. She has never fully stopped being angry about it. She doesn't want to. She thinks the anger, kept properly, is useful. Anger that has been examined and understood and channeled is one of the most productive forces a person can carry. It is only the anger that has been swallowed or suppressed or directed inward that destroys. Nadia's anger has always gone outward and forward, and the trail it has left behind is $2.3 billion and a logistics network that operates on 3 continents and employs over 4,000 people, 40% of whom are women, and 60% of whom are from communities that traditional capital structures have historically excluded. She doesn't make a speech about this. It is simply how she built the company, because it was the right way to build it, and because she knew from experience what it looked like when it wasn't done this way. 18 months before this flight, as part of a broader infrastructure investment strategy, Nadia's holding company acquired a significant stake in a British aviation group, the parent company of the very airline whose first-class cabin she and Amara are now sitting in. It was not a decision made with this particular flight in mind. It was made because the numbers made sense and the long-term infrastructure angle aligned with her expansion into European logistics corridors. She told nobody about it except her board and her legal team, and she boarded this flight the way she boards every flight, quietly, without fanfare, with her daughter beside her and her notebook tucked in her carry-on. Nobody on this plane knows who she is. And 2 rows behind her, because he is always 2 rows behind her when she travels, is Patrick Sewell. Patrick is 34, British Nigerian, with close-cropped hair and glasses and the quiet, competent energy of a man who has anticipated every problem in the room before anyone else has noticed there is a problem. He is Nadia's chief of staff, and he has been with her for 6 years, and in that time, he has become the kind of person whose presence she considers as fundamental to her functioning as oxygen. He does not draw attention to himself. He has a laptop that is always open and a phone that is always charged and a list in his head of every person he might need to call in any situation, at any hour, in any time zone. He has 3 lawyers on speed dial, 2 of whom specialize in corporate discrimination and 1 of whom specializes in aviation law. He notices Cheryl Maddox from the moment she walks past their section of the cabin the first time. He notices the way her eyes move. He doesn't say anything. He opens his laptop and keeps it open. Now let me tell you about Cheryl. Cheryl Maddox is 44 years old and has worked for this airline for 15 years. She started as ground crew, moved to short-haul flights, and has been working long-haul transatlantic routes for the past 7 years. She has a company service award on her mantelpiece at home and a performance review that describes her as efficient and reliable. She knows the aircraft the way you know your own kitchen, where everything is what every sound means, which passengers are going to be easy and which ones are going to create work. She has, over 15 years, developed a set of assessments that she makes about passengers the moment they board. She would not describe these assessments as what they are. She would describe them as experience, as instinct, as knowing her job well enough to read a situation before it develops. But instinct, when it has not been examined, is often just bias given a professional name. And Cheryl's instincts, in 15 years, have calcified into something that she has never once been asked to account for. Nobody has ever asked her to account for them, and so they have hardened. She smiles at some passengers the moment they step through the cabin door. A warm, genuine smile, the kind flight attendants are trained to give, but that Cheryl has refined over years into something that feels almost personal. She gives those passengers her full attention, remembers their names from the manifest, asks if they'd like to be settled before takeoff, offers water before she is asked. And then there are the passengers she glances at, points to their seat, and moves on from. The distinction, if you watch her carefully enough, follows a pattern. It is not subtle to anyone paying attention. It is only subtle to people who have decided they would rather not see it. The flight is an afternoon departure from Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson to London Heathrow. First class is laid out in a single-aisle configuration, 12 seats in a 2-3-2 arrangement, each one a pod with a fully reclining seat and a small personal screen. It is not an empty flight. By the time boarding is complete, 10 of the 12 first-class seats are occupied. Hartsfield-Jackson is the busiest airport in the world by passenger traffic, and it has a particular energy that people who travel through it regularly come to recognize, a kind of controlled intensity, the feeling of enormous numbers of people moving through enormous amounts of space with an efficiency that only barely contains the chaos underneath it. Amara loves it. She has been through this airport 4 times in her life, and she treats it the way she treats any complex system, with focused, absorbed attention, as if she is trying to understand how all of it works. She asks, while they are waiting at the gate, whether all the planes have names. Nadia tells her some of them do. Amara wants to know who decides the names. Nadia says she thinks the airline does. Amara considers this and says she would name a plane the Traveling Moth, which she explains is like a butterfly but for night flights. She writes it in her notebook. Nadia and Amara board about halfway through the boarding window. Nadia walks first, one hand on Amara's shoulder, her carry-on bag rolling smoothly behind her. Amara is wearing yellow trainers. She picked them herself, and her backpack, which has a small stuffed butterfly clipped to the zip. She is looking around the gate area with the expression of someone taking inventory, storing details. They step into the first-class cabin and Cheryl is at the front, directing passengers. When the couple ahead of Nadia and Amara step through, Cheryl's face arranges itself into the professional smile. She directs them to their seats with a small gesture of her hand. And then Nadia and Amara step forward. The smile stays in place. But something shifts behind it. It is the kind of shift that is almost impossible to prove and absolutely impossible to deny. A micro-withdrawal, a barely perceptible stepping back behind the warmth. Cheryl's eyes move over Nadia with a kind of assessment that takes about 2 seconds and lands conclusions that she would never say out loud. She does not offer to help with the carry-on. She points to their seat numbers on the manifest card in her hand without looking up. 14A and B, she says. That's all. She is already looking past them before Nadia has finished thanking her. Amara doesn't notice. She's pressing her face against the window of the door seal as they pass it, looking at the wing outside, mouthing something to herself that might be the beginning of a new constellation theory. She bounces ahead to their seats and immediately climbs into the window seat, pulls her notebook out of her backpack and begins drawing. She is in London before she has left Atlanta. Nadia stows the carry-on, sits down, adjusts her armrest, and opens her magazine. And she does what she has always done, since she was 19 years old in a distribution warehouse and 31 in a boardroom, and every moment in between, she notices everything, and she says nothing yet. Across the aisle and 1 row forward, in seat 12C, there is a man named Marcus Webb. He is 36, with a lean face and the slightly distracted air of someone whose mind is running 2 tracks at once, the present track, which is finding his charger in his bag, and the track underneath, which is the article he is in the middle of writing. Marcus is a journalist. A good one. He works for a publication that covers corporate America with a focus on race, power, and institutional accountability, and he is currently 3 weeks into a piece about the ways in which discrimination manifests in premium service environments, airports, hotels, first-class cabins. He has spent 3 weeks collecting testimonies and data. He has notes. He has sources. He did not expect, getting on this flight, to collect anything else. He has a phone with a good camera that he keeps in his jacket pocket. 2 rows behind Nadia and Amara, in seat 16B, Patrick opens his laptop and positions it so that the aisle is within his line of sight. He puts his earphones in, but does not play anything. He is listening. And in seat 13C, directly across the aisle from Nadia, is Diane Hollis. She is 67, white, with silver hair cut short and the efficient, cheerful energy of a woman who has been retired for 3 years but has not slowed down in the slightest. She spent 30 years as a secondary school teacher in Manchester, which means she has an extremely well-calibrated radar for both nonsense and children who need attention, and she spots Amara within about 45 seconds of sitting down. She watches the little girl drawing in her notebook and feels something warm settle in her chest. She leans forward slightly toward the aisle. "Is that a butterfly?" she asks. Amara looks up. "No," she says seriously. "It's a nebula. But it looks like a butterfly, which is how I know it's real." Diane blinks. Then she laughs, a genuine, delighted laugh. "Well," she says, "I think that might be the best thing anyone has said to me in quite some time." And Amara smiles, just briefly, and goes back to her drawing. The cabin door closes. The aircraft begins to push back from the gate. Outside the window, Atlanta begins to slide away behind them. Amara watches it go with an expression of intense satisfaction, like a plan being executed exactly as she hoped. Nadia watches her daughter, and the complicated mixture of love and worry and pride that is the permanent weather of motherhood moves quietly through her. Above the wing, the sky opens up. The flight reaches cruising altitude somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, and the cabin settles into the particular quietude of long-haul first class. The low hum of pressurized air, the soft click of laptop keys, the occasional murmur of a conversation kept deliberately private. It is the kind of environment designed to make wealthy people feel insulated from the normal friction of the world, and most of the time, it succeeds. For Nadia and Amara, it does not succeed today. It begins with drinks. Cheryl and her colleague, a younger woman named Sofia 28, in her second year on long-haul routes, move through the cabin with the drinks trolley about 40 minutes into the flight. It is the first drink service, and in first class it is done individually, seat by seat, with a personalized touch that is supposed to differentiate the experience from what's happening 4 curtains back in economy. Cheryl works the right side of the aisle. She starts at the front. She is warm with each passenger, efficient, professional, pleasantly attentive. She remembers the man in 11A had asked about scotch when he boarded. She brings it without being asked. She spends a moment with the couple in 12A and B, asks if they're traveling for pleasure or business, and responds to their answer with the kind of practiced interest that feels almost genuine. She reaches the row where Nadia and Amara are sitting. And then she keeps moving, not pausing, not slowing, just walking past, the trolley in front of her, her attention fixed somewhere forward. Diane, from across the aisle, watches this happen. Her expression doesn't change, but something in her goes still. Marcus, who has been watching from the moment the trolley started moving, opens a new document on his laptop. Amara, absorbed in her notebook, doesn't notice. But a few minutes later, she does notice that she's thirsty, because she is 7 and 7-year-olds are always thirsty, and so she does what polite children do. She raises her hand. She holds it up straight, the way she would in class, and waits. Cheryl is 2 rows forward. She is pouring something for another passenger. She glances back. She sees the hand. She holds eye contact for exactly long enough that it cannot later be claimed as accidental, and then she turns back to what she was doing. Amara keeps her hand up for another 30 seconds. Then she lowers it slowly, with a dignity that breaks something in Diane's chest, and turns to her mother. "Did she hear me, Mummy?" she asks. Not upset. Just confused, in the way children are confused when an adult behaves in a way that doesn't make sense to them, because children have not yet been trained to accept inexplicable coldness as normal. Nadia's jaw is very still. "I'll get it for you, my love," she says. Her voice is level. She presses the call button above her seat, a thing she has every right to do, a thing she is paying several $1,000s for the right to do. And when Sofia comes, not Cheryl, Sofia comes, she asks for apple juice and water, please. Sofia brings it immediately, with an apologetic softness around her eyes that communicates more than she is willing to say out loud. Diane leans across the aisle and offers Amara a shortbread biscuit from her bag, and Amara says, "Yes, please, and thank you," with a kind of courtliness that makes Diane want to personally enroll her in every opportunity the world has to offer. They start talking. Diane asks if Amara has been to London before, and Amara says no, but she has read about it and has a lot of questions. For the next 15 minutes, they talk about the Thames and the London Eye, and whether double-decker buses feel different from regular buses, and Amara explains that she wants to see the Natural History Museum because it has a blue whale skeleton that is 25 meters long, which she feels is important. Nadia watches her daughter's face during this conversation. The animation, the gestures, the way she uses her hands when she's explaining something, and loves her so ferociously it almost hurts. Cheryl passes by twice during this conversation. Both times she looks at Amara the way you might look at something that doesn't belong where you found it. Not a stare, just a glance, quick enough to deny, long enough to land. But what happens next is what stays with people. About an hour into the flight, Amara shifts in her seat and her coloring pencil, the one she's been using, the deep blue one she loves because it's exactly the color of the sky just before full dark, rolls off her tray table. It bounces off the armrest, skids across the aisle carpeting, and comes to rest against the wall of the galley at the front of the section, just near Cheryl's feet. Amara looks at it. She gets up because it's her pencil, and that's what you do when you drop something. She moves carefully down the aisle. She is a careful child, deliberate in her movements, and she reaches down to pick it up. And Cheryl, who is standing right there, steps forward. Maybe she doesn't see the pencil. Maybe the movement is unconscious. Maybe, by some generous interpretation, it is simply a coincidence of positioning and timing and bad luck. This is a generous interpretation. Nadia does not make it, and neither does Diane, and neither does Marcus, who has watched every second of this interaction with the attention of a man whose job is to document exactly these kinds of ambiguities, the ones that are obvious to everyone in the room, but that can be individually defended by anyone who chooses not to see them. The pencil snaps under her shoe. Amara freezes. She straightens up slowly and looks at what's in her hand, the 2 halves of her favorite color. She doesn't cry. She is a child who has been taught, even at 7, to manage her feelings in public with something approaching grace. But her face does a thing that 7-year-old faces do when they're trying very hard not to show something, a brief trembling around the edges, a tightening of the lips, a rapid internal calculation happening behind the eyes between the grief of losing something she loved and the dignity of not making it visible. She picks up both halves. She walks back to her seat. She sits down. She places the two halves of the pencil carefully on her tray table, side by side, and looks at them for a moment. Not long, maybe 10 seconds. And in those 10 seconds you can see the decision being made. She picks up a different pencil, the dark green one, and opens her notebook to a new page and begins to draw, as if making a decision about whether to let this ruin something and choosing firmly, quietly, completely, that it will not. She is 7 years old, and she has just made a choice that many adults spend their entire lives trying to learn. She is not pretending the pencil isn't broken. She is choosing what to do next anyway. Nadia has watched all of this. Every moment of it. She has not moved. But her hand on the armrest is very still in the way a hand is still when the person it belongs to is exercising a great deal of control over what the rest of their body wants to do. 2 rows back, Patrick is no longer just watching. He is typing. He is typing quickly. What would you have done in that moment if that had been your child? I want you to sit with that for a second. Because Nadia sits with it. She sits with it and she makes a choice, the same choice she has been making her entire adult life. Not yet. Not here. Not like this. The time and the method matter. She has always known this. She is the woman who spent 12 years building something before she moved, who wrote pages of notes in a notebook while others slept, who understood from the very beginning that power exercised at the right moment is worth 10 times more than power exercised immediately out of anger. She is not passive. She has never once in her life been passive. She is patient. There is a difference, and it is enormous, and she carries it like a skill. But the accounting is coming. She has never in her life failed to balance an account. About 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the dark water between 2 continents, Amara falls asleep. It happens the way it always happens with children, suddenly, completely, without announcement. One moment she is drawing, her pencil moving across the page, and then her head tips slightly to the side and her breathing changes, and the pencil drifts to a stop and she is gone, deeply and entirely asleep, her notebook open on her lap, one hand resting on top of it like she's keeping her work safe even in her dreams. She is beautiful when she sleeps. All children are. But Amara in particular has a quality of stillness when she sleeps that makes her look like she belongs in a painting, something serene and complete and entirely at peace with the world. Her mother takes a photograph, as she always does, because she has been taking photographs of Amara asleep since she was 3 days old, and she does not intend to stop. Nadia puts her phone down and picks her magazine back up. The cabin is quiet. The lights have been dimmed. Most of the other first-class passengers are sleeping or watching their screens with noise-canceling headphones. Marcus is writing. Patrick is reading. Diane has a novel open on her lap, but isn't reading it. She's looking out the window into the dark. Cheryl and Sofia move through the cabin doing the mid-flight check, picking up empty cups, adjusting blankets for sleeping passengers, the quiet maintenance work of long-haul flight. Cheryl moves through the dimmed cabin with the practiced ease of someone who has done this thousands of times, and she comes to the row where Amara is sleeping.
She stops.
Just for a moment. She looks at the child. And then she says something to Sofia, something low, something that only carries far enough for the seats immediately around them. And then she makes the noise. It is not subtle. It is not deniable. It is the kind of sound that has a single reference point in human history, and everyone in earshot understands what it means in under 1 second.
Low.
Deliberate. Shaped into a smirk. And then she moves on, and she laughs. A small, private, contemptuous laugh shared between her and the colleague she assumes will find it as funny as she does. Sofia does not laugh. Sofia stops walking. Her face goes through several things very quickly: shock, horror, and then a kind of paralysis because she is 28 and this is her senior colleague and the hierarchies of workplace belonging are complicated and she doesn't know what to do with what she just heard, so she does what people often do when they don't know what to do. She does nothing for now. Diane's hand goes to her mouth. Marcus looks up from his laptop.
He looks at Diane.
Diane looks at him. Something passes between two strangers in a dimmed aircraft cabin, a recognition, a shared horror, a silent agreement that what just happened was real and witnessed and will not simply evaporate. Marcus's hand moves to his jacket pocket, and Amara stirs. Not because she heard it, she is too deeply asleep for that. She stirs the way sleepers stir, in response to some atmospheric shift, some change in the weight of the room around her. Her eyes flutter, but don't open. She resettles herself, her head tipping the other way, her hand still on her notebook. She didn't hear it. Her mother did. Nadia has not moved from her position, magazine in hand, seated perfectly still. But she heard every syllable of that noise. She cataloged it in the part of her that catalogs everything, the part that has been cataloging things since she was 19 and working night shifts and learning which battles to pick, and when. She sets her magazine down, on the tray table.
Carefully.
And she turns her head, slowly, toward Cheryl. The calm on her face is not the calm of a woman who didn't hear or doesn't understand. It is the calm of a woman who heard everything, understands exactly what it means, and has made a complete decision. "I'd like you to repeat what you just did," she says. Her voice carries. Not loudly, she has not raised it at all. But in the dimmed, quiet first-class cabin, it carries to every row nearby with perfect clarity. Cheryl stops. She turns. And Nadia watches her assess the situation, watches her eyes move over this woman in seat 14A and run their quick, practiced calculation. Who is she? How much trouble can she actually make? Can I manage this? "I'm sorry," Cheryl says. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you know exactly what I mean," Nadia says.
Still calm.
Still seated. Still perfectly level. "I'd like you to do it again, if you're comfortable enough with what you did to repeat it." Cheryl's chin lifts. "Ma'am, I think you may have misheard something." "I didn't mishear anything," Nadia says. Sometimes sounds on aircraft can be. "I didn't mishear anything," Nadia says again. The same sentence, the same tone, immovable. There is a pause. Cheryl reassesses. She takes a breath and recalibrates into the register that customer-facing workers are trained to use when they need to manage a situation without conceding anything, conciliatory, slightly pitying, with just enough condescension woven in to remind the passenger who holds the authority in this particular space. "I understand you might be feeling." "I am not feeling anything that is up for your interpretation," Nadia says. "What you did over my sleeping child is something I am going to need your supervisor to be aware of. So I'd like you to get me your supervisor, please." Cheryl's face changes. There it is, the moment the management script breaks down and the person underneath it becomes visible. She says, with a precision that she clearly does not recognize as the catastrophic mistake it is, "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in economy." The cabin holds its breath. Diane, across the aisle, presses her lips together very tightly. Marcus is very still. Patrick, 2 rows back, has already opened a new email. Nadia looks at Cheryl for a long moment. Then she says, quietly and with absolute finality, "Get me your supervisor." She opens her magazine again. The conversation, as far as she is concerned, is over, not because she is done, but because she is done with Cheryl specifically, and everything that happens next will happen above Cheryl's head. She glances at Amara, still sleeping, still peaceful, her notebook still resting under her hand. "Not yet, baby," she thinks. "You don't need to wake up for this part yet." Gerald Potts has been a flight manager for 9 years. Before that, he was a cabin crew member for 7 years before that, and before that, he worked in hotel hospitality management, which is where he developed the skill set that has served him most reliably throughout his career. The ability to walk into a room where something has gone wrong and make it feel, at least temporarily, like nothing has gone wrong. He is 51, with silver at his temples and a manner that sits somewhere between professional warmth and studied neutrality, and he is very good at his job in the specific sense that his job, as he has come to understand it over the years, is not to resolve problems, but to contain them. To manage the temperature of a situation until the aircraft lands and the problem naturally disperses into the terminal and becomes someone else's file to deal with. He comes to the front section of first class with his hands clasped loosely in front of him and his expression arranged into something that communicates both concern and control in equal and carefully balanced measure. He greets Nadia by looking at her and then looking at the row number above her seat. He does not appear to know her name because he hasn't checked the manifest for it. "Good evening," he says. "I understand you had some concerns." "I don't have concerns," Nadia says. "I have a report to make." Gerald's expression remains unchanged. "Of course. I'm here to listen. Can you tell me what happened?" Nadia tells him, clearly, concisely, with the same delivery she would use in a boardroom, what was done when, in what context, over whose sleeping body. She does not embellish. She does not raise her voice. She gives him the facts the way you hand someone a document you already have a copy of. Gerald listens. He nods in the places where nodding communicates empathy without admitting anything. When Nadia finishes, he pauses for a moment that he has learned to use strategically, long enough to seem considered, short enough not to suggest he needed to think about whether he believed her. "Ms." He pauses. He still doesn't know her name. "Osei," Nadia says. "Ms. Osei, I want you to know that we take any concern of this nature extremely seriously." He pauses again. "I want to ask, is it possible that what you heard was perhaps a sound from the aircraft? Sometimes the pressure systems in the galley." "No," Nadia says. "Or possibly a conversation between crew members that may have." "No," Nadia says. "I know what I heard. Diane, across the aisle, heard it. I would expect the gentleman in 12C heard it as well." Gerald's eyes move briefly across the aisle to Diane, who meets his gaze without blinking and says, clearly and calmly, "I heard it. I'd be happy to put that in writing." Something shifts in Gerald's face. Just slightly. The management architecture develops a small crack. "I appreciate that," he says. He has lowered his voice now. "And I assure you we will look into this fully. In the meantime, I wonder if we might make the remainder of your flight more comfortable. Perhaps a complimentary." "I don't want anything complimentary," Nadia says. "I want this formally logged. I want a written record that this report was made, the time it was made, and who received it. Can you do that?" Another pause. This is the pause that tells everything. Because what Nadia is asking for is completely reasonable. It is, in fact, the minimum standard response to a formal complaint on an aircraft. Any flight manager at any professional airline should be able to say yes to that request without hesitation. The hesitation tells Nadia, and everyone within earshot, that Gerald is not currently thinking about what the right response is. He is thinking about what the manageable response is. "I'll make sure that everything is properly documented," he says, which is not the same as saying yes. Marcus, who has been recording on his phone since the moment Gerald arrived, now has approximately 4 minutes of footage. He puts his phone back in his pocket and goes back to his laptop. Sofia is standing near the galley entrance, close enough to hear everything, her hands clasped in front of her the way people hold their hands when they're not sure what to do with them. She is thinking about what she heard. She is thinking about the fact that she has been working with Cheryl for 2 years and has watched her move through cabins, and she has noticed things, small things, the kind of small things she has told herself were not her business, and she is now sitting with the weight of all those small things at once. She is not ready to say anything yet, but something in her is moving. In seat 16B, Patrick is not reading or listening to music. His laptop is open, and he is composing emails with the efficiency of someone who is prepared for exactly this kind of situation. He has already sent a message to the airline's VP of Customer Experience. He has sent a message to the head of Human Resources. He has sent messages to 2 board members whose contact information he maintains because maintaining contact information is what Patrick does. He has contacted Nadia's legal team with a brief summary of the situation and a request that they be on standby for when the aircraft lands. He then checks his watch, calculates the remaining flight time, and begins drafting a summary document. Amara wakes up while Gerald is still standing in the aisle. She blinks, looks around at the faces, at Gerald's careful expression, at her mother's composed one, at Diane watching quietly from across the aisle, and she does what children do when they sense something significant is happening around them. She tries to read the room. "Mummy," she says quietly. "Is everything okay?" Nadia turns from Gerald to her daughter. The shift is complete and immediate. The same woman, but a different register entirely, warm and steady and certain. She reaches out and smooths Amara's hair back from her forehead. "Everything is being handled, my star," she says. "How did you sleep?" "I dreamed about the whale," Amara says. "The one at the museum. It was swimming." "That sounds beautiful," Nadia says. "It was," Amara says. She picks up her notebook. She notices the two halves of her blue pencil still sitting on the tray table. She looks at them for a moment, then picks up her green one and opens to a new page.
She begins to draw.
Gerald retreats to the galley. He needs to make a phone call. The phone call Gerald makes takes about 6 minutes. He makes it from the small crew area at the rear of the business class section, speaking quietly, his back to the curtain. He is called the airline's ground operations duty manager in London, the person responsible for managing any significant incidents that develop in flight before arrival. It is standard procedure. He outlines the situation in the brisk, clinical language of someone reporting a maintenance issue rather than a human one. The duty manager listens. And then the duty manager puts him on hold. This is not standard. Gerald stands in the crew area with the phone pressed to his ear, and the hold music playing and his hand, just slightly, tightening around the handset. Something has shifted. He can feel it the way you feel a pressure change in the air before weather arrives. The duty manager comes back. Her voice is different now. There is something carefully controlled in it, a calibration that didn't exist before the hold. She asks Gerald to repeat the passenger's name. "Osei," Gerald says. "Nadia Osei. Seat 14A. There is a pause on the other end that is approximately 2 seconds long and contains, in those 2 seconds, an entire rearrangement of priorities. Gerald, the duty manager, says, "I need you to go and speak to the passenger in 14A, and I need you to do it differently than you just did."
Can you do that?
Gerald's face, in the privacy of the crew area, goes through several things. "What do you mean, differently?" "I mean," she says carefully, "that Ms. Osei is a significant stakeholder in the group. I mean that her legal team has already been in contact with our HR division. And I mean that if this flight lands and this situation has not been properly handled, it will be the most expensive conversation you and I have ever had with our careers." Gerald is very still for a moment. "Understood," he says. He hangs up. He stands in the crew area for a count of approximately 5 seconds, collecting himself. Then he walks back through the curtain. He finds Cheryl first. He takes her to the side and speaks to her quietly, so quietly that nobody can hear the words, but Cheryl's face communicates everything that needs to be communicated. It begins with confusion and moves through a rapid series of stages: disbelief, a flash of defensiveness, and then, arriving slowly like something surfacing from deep water, the first real understanding of the magnitude of what she has done. Her face, by the end, is the face of a woman who has just seen the full shape of a mistake that cannot be unmade. Gerald leaves her standing there and walks to seat 14A. He is a different man. Not literally, same silver temples, same clasped hands, but the manner has changed completely. The professional containment is gone. What has replaced it is not quite humility. Gerald Potts has not fully arrived at humility, but it is a very close cousin of it, the version that visits when self-interest and correct behavior briefly align. "Ms. Osei," he says, and this time the name is in his mouth before she has to supply it. "I owe you a significant apology. I did not handle our previous conversation the way it should have been handled, and I am sorry for that. I also want to be clear that the incident you reported is being formally logged and will result in an investigation upon landing. I want to ask what you need for the rest of this flight." Nadia looks at him. She studies him with the same unblinking, measuring attention that she brings to any person or situation she is evaluating. She is deciding how much weight his changed tone deserves. The answer is not much, because the tone only changed when someone told him something about her, and she knows that. The correction is not moral. It is strategic. She knows the difference between someone who has done right and someone who has been told to. "I don't need anything from you for the rest of the flight," she says. "I need to know that the formal log has been completed, that my chief of staff receives confirmation of it, and that there are appropriate people waiting when we land." "Yes, ma'am," Gerald says. And then he says something that reveals more than he intends. I want you to know that we are fully aware of who. He stops. Rethinks. We take this matter extremely seriously. Nadia watches him correct himself. She notes it. Patrick, she says, and Patrick is already there, appearing from 2 rows back as if he had simply been waiting for his name, which he had. Can you give Gerald your contact information? Patrick hands Gerald a card. It is a plain white card with his name and a phone number and the name of Nadia's company, and Gerald looks at it and the color of his face changes incrementally. Marcus Webb has watched all of this. He has also, in the intervening time, done what journalists do. He has pulled Nadia Osei's name into a search on his phone, and what has come back has given him several quiet, significant minutes of reading. He has read the Forbes profile. He has read the coverage of the logistics company's European expansion. He has read the item, buried in a financial news brief from 18 months ago, about the acquisition of a stake in a British aviation group. And then he has looked at the name of the airline on the seat pocket in front of him. And the two things have clicked together. He unbuckles his seatbelt and steps across the aisle. Ms. Osei, he says. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a journalist. He pauses. I've been on this flight since Atlanta, and I think you should know that I have footage from the incident and from everything that has happened since. I want you to know it exists. I'm not going to do anything with it without your awareness. Nadia looks at him. A long look, the kind that takes a person's measure. May I see it? He hands her his phone. She watches it. The footage is about 6 minutes total, the audio slightly compressed but clear enough. She watches her daughter sleeping. She watches what Cheryl does. She watches Gerald's first conversation and his second. She watches all of it without any visible change in her expression. Then she hands a phone back to Marcus. Keep that safe, she says. There is a pause. Are you planning to? Marcus starts. I'm planning to get off this plane and take my daughter to see Big Ben, Nadia says. Everything else will be handled in the proper order. Marcus goes back to his seat. He reopens his laptop. His article, which was going to be about data and testimonies and the quiet accumulation of 1,000 small incidents that nobody ever sees, is now going to be something else. Somewhere behind them, Cheryl Maddox is sitting in a jump seat in the rear galley. She is very still. She is thinking about the manifest. She is thinking about the name on it. She is thinking about what Gerald said to her. And she is doing arithmetic, the slow, terrible arithmetic of someone adding up the cost of a decision they cannot take back. The aircraft descends toward London. The aircraft touches down at Heathrow just after 7 in the morning, London time. The sky outside the windows is the gray-white of an early English morning, low clouds moving quickly over the tarmac, and the lights of the terminal are warm and yellow against it. Amara has been awake for the last hour of the flight. She is pressed against the window as the plane descends, watching the landscape appear below, the patchwork of green fields and roads and rooftops that eventually gives way to the sprawling infrastructure of the airport, and she is naming things out loud under her breath, quietly enough that only Nadia, seated beside her, can hear.
There's a pond, Amara says.
And there's a road with a roundabout. Diane, did you know they have roundabouts everywhere here? Diane, who has not slept and does not regret it, says that yes, she is aware, and that roundabouts are one of Britain's most reliable exports. Amara considers this seriously. Better than cars, she asks. Arguably, Diane says. The aircraft taxis to the gate. The seatbelt sign goes off. And the cabin, as cabins do, begins the organized bustle of arrival, bags retrieved, coats gathered, screens switched off. It is the same routine Amara has done before on shorter flights, but everything feels different this morning, charged with something she can feel but cannot name. She watches the adults around her with her wide, careful eyes, and she notices that her mother is very still in a way that is different from her usual stillness. She notices that Patrick, who she knows well and who is usually calm in the reassuring way of background furniture, is standing in the aisle and checking his phone with a focus that she associates with things being important. She does not ask questions. She holds her notebook against her chest and she watches. What Cheryl Maddox expected, getting off this aircraft, was the normal end of a flight. Walk off, brief, debrief with the crew, collect her bag, go home to the layover hotel. Maybe have a conversation with HR later in the week. A formal conversation, the kind that goes in a file and stays there, the kind that airlines have become practiced at conducting in ways that produce paperwork without consequences. What Cheryl Maddox gets is something else entirely. There are people at the gate. Not the normal assembly of ground staff and boarding agents. These people are standing together, with the quiet formation of people who have been briefed, who know why they are here, who are not here by accident. There is a woman in a dark jacket with the airline's corporate logo, who Patrick identifies immediately as the airline's UK Director of Human Resources. There is a man beside her who is, from his bearing and the particular tension in his posture, some variety of legal. And standing slightly apart from them, with the expression of a man who has had a very difficult 90 minutes on a very early morning, is the UK Managing Director of the airline, whose name is James Whitmore, and who has been in this job for 6 years and has never had a morning quite like this one. Cheryl sees them. She processes the configuration of people standing at the gate. And she does what people sometimes do when they realize the situation is worse than they prepared for. She tries to leave a different way, moving toward a secondary exit at the rear jetway. She is stopped. Quietly, professionally, but stopped. Nadia comes off the plane holding Amara's hand. She is unhurried. She walks at the pace of someone who knows that the situation is already contained and that her presence is the event everyone is waiting for, and she sees no reason to rush toward it. Amara is beside her, backpack on, butterfly clipped to the zip, notebook in her free hand, looking around the jetway with the expression of someone arriving somewhere they have been thinking about for a very long time. "Mummy," Amara says, looking at the gray morning through the gate windows, "is London always this color?"
Not always, Nadia says.
Sometimes it's darker. Amara considers this. "I think I like it," she says. "I thought you might," Nadia says. And then, "Are we still going to see Big Ben?" Nadia looks at her daughter. And she laughs. A real laugh, full and genuine. The first one since they boarded the aircraft in Atlanta, and it comes from somewhere deep and real, and it makes Amara grin because Amara loves her mother's laugh more than almost anything. "First thing tomorrow morning," Nadia says. "Today we rest. And the Whale Museum?" "And the Whale Museum." Amara nods with the satisfaction of a schedule confirmed. She squeezes her mother's hand. Patrick is already ahead of them, introducing himself to the assembled group at the gate, speaking quietly, handing over documents from his bag with the efficiency of someone who has had them prepared since before the plane landed. James Whitmore steps forward to meet Nadia. He is a man in his mid-50s, and he has the look of someone who has spent a sleepless night processing information he wishes he had received differently. He offers his hand. Nadia shakes it. "Ms. Osei," he says. "Thank you I want to first say that I am deeply sorry for what you and your daughter experienced on this flight. There are no adequate words for it, and I won't pretend otherwise." Nadia looks at him. She is reading him the way she always reads people, for the space between what they say and what they mean, for the presence or absence of the thing that makes an apology real, which is whether the person has actually reckoned with what happened or is simply managing the consequences of it. She makes a judgment. "I appreciate you being here," she says. "I'd like us to speak somewhere private." They find a meeting room off the arrivals corridor, one of the small corporate suites that airports maintain for exactly this kind of conversation, and Diane takes Amara to the Costa Coffee nearby for hot chocolate and more conversation about London, which Amara accepts with the graciousness of a child who understands, on some level, that the adults need the room. What happens in the meeting room is not a confrontation in the theatrical sense. There is no shouting. There is no table pounding. There are no tears, because Nadia does not perform her emotions for the benefit of the people who caused them. What happens in that room is something quieter and more powerful than any of that. A precise, thorough, devastating account, delivered by a woman who has been taking meticulous mental notes for 8 hours and who has a lawyer on the phone, and a journalist with video footage, and a chief of staff who has already filed formal communications with for levels of the organization's hierarchy. She tells James Whitmore what happened. All of it. From the moment they boarded, the refusal to acknowledge them, the skipped drink service, the pencil, to the incident over Amara's sleeping body, to Cheryl's response when challenged, to Gerald's first attempt to manage and then minimize the complaint, to the moment Gerald's tone changed after he made his phone call and was told who she was. She speaks for about 12 minutes, without interruption. James Whitmore listens. He has a notepad open in front of him, but he barely writes anything on it. He is listening with the specific quality of attention of a man who knows that what is being said is true, who has no mechanism for defending against it, and who is trying to decide what kind of man he wants to be in this room. She is not performing. That is the thing that makes her account so difficult to sit with. There is no theatrics in it, no raised voice, no appeal to his sympathy. She is precise. She is thorough. She gives him the timeline and the details the way she would present a case to a board, because that is what this is. It is a case. It has evidence, witnesses, a timeline, and a clear outcome that she expects it to produce. She has been preparing to make this case, in one form or another, for the entire duration of the flight. When she finishes, there is a silence. She targeted my daughter, Nadia says. A 7-year-old child. Who did nothing. Who was coloring in her notebook and asking for apple juice and being polite to every adult who gave her 2 seconds of basic human decency. That child exists in a world that is going to make it difficult for her in ways that I cannot fully protect her from, and I have accepted that because I have to. But I will not accept that this airline considers what happened on that flight to be a containable incident. I will not accept that Cheryl Maddox goes back to work next week. And I will not accept a response that is designed to protect the airline rather than acknowledge what happened to my daughter. She pauses. She lets that settle. I also want to be clear, she says, that I am not doing this because of my position in your parent company.
I want you to understand that.
I am doing this because it is right. And because the next woman on the next flight who has this experience may not have Patrick 2 rows back or a journalist across the aisle or legal counsel on the phone, and the only way any of that changes is if this industry is made to face what it currently allows to happen in its first-class cabins. James Whitmore looks at her. He closes his notepad. What would you like to see happen, he says. And Nadia tells him. Within 48 hours, several things happen. Cheryl Maddox is suspended from duty pending a formal disciplinary investigation. The airline's HR director confirms this in writing, and a copy of the confirmation goes to Nadia's legal team, to Patrick, and is later referenced by Marcus in his article. The suspension is not announced publicly by the airline. Airlines rarely announce disciplinary actions involving individual staff members, but the fact of it is not deniable, and when the story breaks, 3 separate airline sources confirm it on background. The investigation that follows is more thorough than the airline initially intended. This is partly because of Marcus's article, partly because of the video, and partly because once HR begins pulling Cheryl's record, they find what they should have found years ago if anyone had been looking: a pattern of complaints, logged and then closed, from passengers whose reports had not been taken seriously enough to require action. For complaints over 9 years, none of them had been connected. None of them had produced consequences. They had each been processed individually, treated as isolated incidents, resolved with apology letters and travel vouchers, and filed away. Nobody had ever put them in the same room and asked what the pattern meant. They are in the same room now. Gerald Potts does not face the same immediate action, but his handling of the initial complaint, his attempt to minimize, to offer champagne, to suggest misunderstanding, to hesitate on the formal log, is included in a separate HR review. Whether that review produces consequences beyond paperwork is something only Gerald and the airline will know for certain. But the review happens. And Gerald knows it happens. And the knowledge of it is its own kind of consequence, the kind that follows a person into every future conversation they have with every future passenger who tries to make a complaint, because the memory of what it felt like to have that conversation with James Whitmore at the airport gate is not something that fades quickly. Sofia speaks to HR. She has thought about it for 36 hours, during the crew layover, during a long walk along the Thames embankment at dawn where she stood looking at the water and thinking about the pencil, the hand raised for apple juice, the sound, and then she sits down with the HR director and gives a full account. She describes what she witnessed. She describes what she heard. She does not minimize it or equivocate about it. She says what happened. She is shaking slightly as she says it, but she says it. She does not know if it changes anything that she said nothing in the moment. She will think about that for a long time. She will probably always think about it. The thinking about it is, in some ways, its own form of accountability, the private kind, the kind that cannot be measured or rewarded or acknowledged by anyone else, but that matters anyway because it changes how she moves through the world afterward. She does not look away from things the way she looked away that day. She has decided, in the 36 hours between the flight and the HR meeting, that she will not do that again. That the discomfort of speaking is smaller than the weight of silence, and that she now knows this from experience rather than principle, which is the only way anyone ever truly knows anything. Marcus Webb's article publishes 4 days after the flight. It is longer than he originally planned, much longer. He has restructured it entirely around what happened on that aircraft, using Amara and Nadia's story as the frame through which the broader data and testimonies he collected finally come to life. He does not name Amara by full name. He checked with Nadia, who agreed to the article on the condition that Amara's identity remained protected. He refers to her as a 7-year-old girl. He names Nadia.
He names the airline.
The article circulates. It circulates very widely. It is shared in places the airline's communications team did not anticipate and cannot contain. The video that Marcus collected, which he does share with audio that is undeniable, does what video always does in the age of the internet. It lives everywhere at once. The airline releases a public statement. It is carefully worded in the way that lawyers word things. Every sentence measured, every acknowledgement balanced against a qualifier. Nadia's legal team reads it carefully and identifies 3 places where the language creates ambiguity about what actually happened, and they send a letter. A revised version of the statement is released 24 hours later. The revised version is clearer. These are the institutional things. They matter. They are the architecture of accountability, the formal record, the thing that goes in a file and can be referred to and built upon. Nadia's legal team is already in conversations about what comes next, about what accountability looks like beyond a suspension and a press release, about what role a significant shareholder might have in advocating for systemic changes to training, reporting structures, and complaint procedures. Those conversations are long, and they involve the kind of language that lives in legal briefs and boardroom agendas. They are not the language of Amara at the window with her broken pencil, but they are connected to her. Everything that happens in those rooms, every policy changed or procedure revised or training program overhauled, is connected, invisibly but really, to a 7-year-old girl who raised her hand politely for apple juice and was looked through like she wasn't there. Nadia understands this connection. It is why she is having those conversations rather than accepting the apology and going home. She does not do it for recognition. She does it because she can, and because most people who experience what she experienced cannot, and because she has always believed her mother's voice, always her mother's voice, that if you have the tools, you have the obligation. But none of that is the most important thing that happens in the 48 hours after the flight. The most important thing happens on the evening of the day they arrive. Nadia and Amara are in their hotel room in Bloomsbury, a quiet room with wide windows that look out over the gray-green of Russell Square. Amara has had a bath and is wearing her pajamas, and she is at the window with her notebook open, drawing. She is drawing the London skyline as she sees it from the window, the rooftops and the trees and the sky, which is cleared in the late afternoon to a color she hasn't seen before, a kind of pale gold that she is trying to reproduce with her pencils. She has found, in her pencil case, that she still has the 2 halves of the blue one. She has been using them, holding the broken halves together between her fingers, pressing them to the page, and they still make the same marks. She decided, sitting at the window, that a broken pencil still works. She seems satisfied with this conclusion. Nadia is watching her from the armchair across the room. She has her feet curled under her and a cup of tea that has gone cold on the side table, and she is just watching Amara draw, watching her tongue press to the corner of her lip the way it does. Watching her hold the broken pencil halves together with such precise, deliberate care. Amara looks up. She has sensed her mother's attention. "Mummy," she says. "Why are some people mean?" Nadia is quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of not knowing what to say, but the quiet of a woman who has thought about this question for 38 years and has many answers and is choosing which one is right for right now, right for her 7-year-old, right for this evening window, and this pale gold London light. Some people, she says slowly, are afraid. Not of big things usually, not of real things. They're afraid of things they don't understand. And when people are afraid of something they don't understand, they sometimes become cruel toward it because cruelty makes them feel bigger and safer. Even though it doesn't actually make them safer. It just makes them cruel. Amara thinks about this. She looks back at her drawing. She adds a line to the skyline, a chimney, maybe, or a spire. Were you afraid? She asks. On the plane? No, Nadia says. I was angry, and I was sad a little, but I wasn't afraid. Amara nods. This seems to make sense to her. You were very calm, she says. I know. Was that on purpose? Nadia smiles. Yes. Amara considers the skyline in her notebook. Being calm is hard sometimes, she says. One of the hardest things there is, Nadia says. And one of the strongest. Amara looks at her. Is that why you do it? Yes, Nadia says. That's exactly why. Amara considers this. She looks back at her drawing and adds something, a detail, a small thing, something near the bottom of the page that Nadia cannot quite see from where she's sitting. Mrs. Patterson says the best kind of strength is the kind people don't expect, Amara says. She says it the way children say things they are trying out, testing the weight of them, seeing how they land. Mrs. Patterson is a smart woman, Nadia says. She said you have it, Amara says. When she met you at the parent thing. She said you had a kind of strength that people underestimate. Nadia is quiet for a moment. What did you say? Amara shrugs, still drawing. I said I know. Nadia looks at her daughter. This child who holds a broken pencil together with both hands because the drawing still needs to be finished. This child who raised her hand for apple juice with perfect, patient courtesy and kept it raised for 30 seconds after she was ignored and then lowered it with a dignity that took Diane's breath away. This child who is 7 years old and has already, somehow, without being taught it explicitly, learned the difference between being defeated and choosing what to do next. I'm going to draw Grandma Adwoa's school tomorrow. If we can find it, we'll find it, Nadia says. Good, Amara says. She presses the broken pencil halves together and draws a careful, deliberate star above the London skyline. I think she would have liked London in this color, she says. I think she would have loved it, Nadia says. Outside the window, the pale gold deepens to something closer to amber, and the first few stars begin to appear above the city, faint but there, the same stars that are above Atlanta and Accra, and everywhere that Amara has not yet been but will go. She picks up her notebook and draws them. I need you to sit with this story for a moment before I let you go. Because there is something I want to say, something important, and I need you to actually hear it. Nadia and Amara's story ended the way it ended because of a very specific set of circumstances that most people will never have access to. Nadia is worth $2.3 billion. She has a chief of staff who is always 2 rows behind her, who has lawyers on speed dial, who was composing emails before the flight manager had finished his first sentence. She is a shareholder in the airline that employed Cheryl Maddox. She had a journalist with video footage sitting across the aisle by coincidence. She had a retired schoolteacher willing to go on record as a witness. She had resources that transformed a complaint on an aircraft into a story that circulated around the world. Most people don't have Patrick. Most people don't have lawyers on standby. Most people don't sit on the board. Think about what this story would have looked like if Nadia had not been who she is. Think about what it would have looked like if she had been a teacher or a nurse or an accountant, someone with a good life, a comfortable life, a life she had worked hard and honestly to build. She would still have heard what Cheryl did. The noise would still have been the same noise. Amara's pencil would still have snapped. The apple juice would still have gone unserved. All of that would have happened in exactly the same way because Cheryl Maddox's assessment of Amara and Nadia had nothing to do with their net worth. It had to do with who she decided they were the moment they walked through the cabin door. And that decision was made before she knew a single thing about them. The difference, the only difference, is what happens after. If Nadia had been a teacher, Gerald would have offered his champagne and his carefully managed condolences, and the incident would have been logged in whatever way the airline logs incidents that are not going to produce consequences, and the file would have been placed somewhere, and nothing would have changed. Cheryl would have worked her next flight, and the flight after that, and the one after that, because the system is very good at absorbing complaints that do not come with leverage attached. This is what I mean when I say that the resolution in this story is satisfying and also incomplete at the same time. The satisfaction is real. Watching accountability arrive at the gate is genuinely satisfying. I will not pretend it isn't. But it is satisfaction purchased at a price that most people cannot pay, and that is the injustice that sits underneath the whole story and refuses to be resolved by one suspension and one press statement. That injustice is structural. It lives in the gap between who gets heard and who doesn't, who gets believed and who doesn't, who gets the meeting room and who gets the managed smile and the complimentary champagne and the careful suggestion that perhaps they misheard something. And this is the truth that matters. Dignity should not require a net worth. A child should not need her mother to be a billionaire in order to be treated like a human being on an airplane. That is the baseline. That is where we should already be. That is the thing that story after story, experience after experience, generation after generation, we have not yet managed to get right. I think about Adwoa, Nadia's mother, who spent 35 years teaching children that stories were the most important thing in the world. That if you could name what you feel, you could survive it. I think about the fact that she was British Ghanaian, that she moved between countries and built a life and raised a daughter and pressed $400 into her hands at an airport and said, "That's everything I have to give you. The rest you make yourself." I think about what Adwoa would have felt watching her granddaughter on that plane. The pride, the heartbreak, the recognition that the world she hoped was changing is still, in too many of its corners, exactly as it was. I think about Amara, 7 years old, drawing constellations, naming stars that nobody else has named yet, carrying a notebook full of things she has noticed and wondered about and refused to let go of. She does not yet fully understand what happened on that plane. She understands pieces of it. She is too perceptive not to understand something, but the full picture, the history it sits within, the weight of it, that is still being assembled inside her, piece by piece, the way all understanding is assembled. She will understand it more completely as she gets older. And that process, the process of a child coming to understand the world that exists around her skin, around her presence in spaces, is one of the great private griefs of Black motherhood. Nadia knows it is coming. She is already, quietly, trying to give her daughter every tool she will need. The language for it, the steadiness, the knowledge that calm is not weakness, the knowledge that anger, kept properly, is useful, the knowledge that a broken pencil still makes the same mark. She is trying to give Amara all of that, because the world has not yet given her the alternative. And so this story, Amara and Nadia's story, is not just a story about a racist flight attendant who didn't know who she was dealing with. That framing, as satisfying as it is the smallest version of the story. The larger version is this. A woman built something extraordinary from nothing, and the world still looked at her daughter and made a noise. The net worth is not the point. The billions are not the point. The point is that none of it should have happened to begin with. The point is that it happens every day to people who don't have $2.3 billion, and it happens to them quietly, and it is absorbed and the system continues, and the Cheryls of the world work their next flights, and nobody waits at the gate. That is the version of this story I want you to carry. Not the shareholder, not the executives. The 7-year-old at the window, pressing two halves of a broken pencil together, drawing stars above the London skyline, naming them things nobody else has named yet. She was always exactly who she is. She was always extraordinary. She was always worth every courtesy extended to every other child in that cabin. The plane and Cheryl and Gerald and all of it, none of that changed who she is. It only revealed who they are. Amara drew a star over the London skyline that evening, and I believe she named it something, even if she hasn't told anyone yet, because she is the kind of child who names things. And wherever that star is, whatever she called it, it belongs to her, and it is real, and it is hers, and nothing that happened at 35,000 feet took a single atom of it away. If this story moved you, if you felt something when that hand went up in the aisle and nobody came, if you felt something when the pencil snapped, if you felt something in that hotel room at the end, share this video. Because the point is not to celebrate a billionaire. The point is to say, this happens. This is real. And it should not be. And the more people who understand that, who sit with the discomfort of it rather than clicking away from it, the better chance we have of building a world where a child doesn't need her mother to own part of the airline in order to be treated with basic human dignity. Tell me in the comments, what moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it the pencil? The hand raised for apple juice? The hotel room at the end? I want to know. Because these are the details that matter. These are the details that make it real. We read every comment. Every single one. And we will see you in the next story.